Welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife, and we are moving on with our second volume or iteration of the profile on a veteran for the month of November. And this week's guest for the show is Ethan Skarstedt, also known as Skar. To his military friends, is a Utah National Guardsman, and had a blast reading he's an author, reading his work and finding out more about him and what he's done and is doing. So I'm your host, Sam Wolf, and you are listening to Life of a Military Wife. All right, so we're here with Ethan. And so, Ethan, go ahead and explain when and why you joined the military. What was your motivation for that?
Sure. So I joined the Utah National Guard back in 1996. Yes, I'm old. But the reason I did it was, there were many reasons. I was in college at the time. I was actually in ROTC, on track to go be an officer. And talking to my dad, who had been an officer in Vietnam. He served as a platoon leader with the 101st, and other people that I ran into. I thought to myself, my goodness, I would really like to have some NCO time, or at least some enlisted experience before I go be an officer. And I'm not an officer now. There's a whole story there. But I wanted to be airborne. I wanted to be an experienced and practical officer. And I really wanted, the larger reason was I wanted to contribute to the common defense of the country. I mean, people get a lot of, it sounds very cliche, kind of campy, but that's literally what it was. And I don't think it's cliche or campy. I wanted to contribute to the common defense. So I took a semester off of school at BYU and went through basic training and AIT and airborne school to be a member of the 19th SF here in Utah National Guard. And when I got back, an officer of the ROTC department who was there before and after me had taken a disliking to me. And he was just like, you're not officer material. We need you out. And so I can't just kick you out, but I can say if you don't restart the program as a freshman, I was a junior at this time, we're just going to not carry you forward. And I went to the commandant of the ROTC department, and he was brand new. He had come in while I was on my deferment, going to basic training and AIT and so on. And he's just like, sorry, man, I don't know you from Adam. I'm just going to go with my officer. So I'm like, all right, I'm not starting over when I'm ready to graduate. So I was just out, went back, and I am so glad I did. I got to do the actual work of my MOS and my other, I got to be down in the trenches for 20 years instead of, like 3 or 4 before I became staff. I'm a master sergeant and staff now, but yeah, 20 plus years of doing actual work versus a few years. And don't get me wrong, officers do great work, but I preferred being outside to being at my desk. So that was great. That's when I joined. And yeah, then 2001 happened, September 11th, and things got really interesting for the next 23 years.
How did September 11th, watching that happen, what were your thoughts? What hit you about, because you're military right now. You just saw what happened.
It was like everybody, I think it was a big unknown. I probably had a little bit more insight onto what might happen. I was in E4, I was a specialist at the time all that happened, so I didn't have a ton of experience, but I knew something was going to happen. And less than a year after that happened, as you know, special forces teams were in Afghanistan, and guys from the 19th, not me, but Green Beret teams from the 19th were on the ground in Afghanistan, backfilling those teams that were the first teams that were getting pulled out. And then later we deployed in support of that continuing rotation that the 19th was doing in Afghanistan for a few years.
So, how many deployments did you do? What was your involvement in the war in Afghanistan?
So in Afghanistan in particular, I was there from 03 to 04, a little over a year on the ground, and then again in 2014, about a 10-month stint on the ground then. To put it all in context, when I was in, so I deployed to Kuwait as part of Operation Desert Spring first. And then while we were there, the buildup to the invasion of Iraq was going on. And so we were involved, it was all hands on deck at that point. I talked about, and anyway, so we went in to help invade Iraq. We're banged around Baghdad for a couple of months and then came out. And less than 30 days later, the battalion that I was part of deployed to Afghanistan, and I went with them.
So you did Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, initial invasion, then Afghanistan. I never did go back to Iraq. And frankly, when I was in Iraq that first time, almost all the fighting was done by the time we rolled into Baghdad. And the jihadis had all disappeared into the woodwork. They were busy hiding at that point, and they didn't start coming out until a year or two later. And then it got really nasty.
Yeah.
I ran into a lot of people that were very friendly and just like, thank heavens the Americans are here. Hey, you guys bombed our water supply. Can you help us? We know you're interested in helping us get the water supply back. And we're just like, why, yes, we can. And wow, thank you for the bread and the flowers. Awesome. Everywhere we went in Baghdad, they were, yeah.
That's awesome to have the opportunity to see the gratitude. It's not always the case. I was talking to my husband about something and the other day, and he just randomly threw out, I'm like, wait, people called you that? He's like, oh, I never told you that about my. The locals were not very nice when he was in Afghanistan. And some of the things that were said to the troops there when he was there was just not that great. It was so hearing the gratitude, I think it really probably helps you feel like you're making a difference.
Absolutely. And yeah, one of the coolest things we did was they, in the recovery from the invasion, one of the nearby towns to the place that we were set up decided they wanted a water master and a fire marshal. And they thought to themselves, my goodness, the Americans are here. You know what we could do? We could hold an election. We could elect a water master and a fire marshal. And so they held this. I mean, we pulled security for it. That's what we did. We pulled security for their homebrew. We're going to do this democracy thing election for the water master and the fire marshal. It was very
That's
cool to watch.
awesome. That would be fabulous to see democracy in its infancy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me take it with a grain of salt the people that are saying, as nowadays, as though it's a matter of course. It's just unquestionable that, oh, yeah, democracy doesn't work in all these different places. Like, I kind of saw it. They really liked the idea. They made it work in front of me. I think there are probably other factors at play, like despots with guns attempting to squash democracy. So, yeah,
Yep.
we can't go in all happy-go-lucky and just expect democracy to spring up overnight. It's going to take somebody defeating the despots with guns. But, as you've seen politically, we really don't have the will for that, especially when a large percentage of the political spectrum would much rather use conflict to gain political power at home than to
Yeah.
actually accomplish anything.
It feels like politicians prefer the issue over the solution, and that's just not going to make anyone's lives better.
Yep.
So you I know this basically because of some other things when researching for this episode. I know that you did what was kind of like an active guard for a while. You
Uh-huh.
were looking for active slots. So you've never been active duty, you're a guard. Explain how that, because not everyone's familiar with how that all works.
Sure. So as a guardsman, traditionally you drill 1 weekend, you spend 1 weekend a month with the unit that you're part of, And then 2 weeks in the summer, you do some larger exercise. In the 19th here in Utah, it's always a little bit more than that because it's a special operations unit, but it's just it's the way of the world. But occasionally, the National Guard comes around and says, "Hey, you have an expertise in this area, and we're standing up some sort of full-time activity to pursue something where that expertise is relevant, not relative, relevant. And we'd like to put you on orders for a year." Typically, it's only ever for a year, the fiscal year, from October 1st through September 30th. And then they decide on leading up to the end of that fiscal year, whether or not they're going to continue the activity and therefore need you or not, etc. So it's when it comes to job stability, it's a double-edged sword, because once you get picked up for a year, the money's already allocated. You've got a paycheck coming for a year. But which is not like a regular civilian job, because you could get fired literally at any time. They could run out of money whenever, etc. It's a lot more stable that way. But at the same time, every single fiscal year, it's like, well, you're either on for the next year or you're off. We'll let you know, usually about a week before the end of the fiscal year. Yeah. It's hard to make
Yay,
plans.
military. I
Yeah.
know. The hurry up and wait is real.
Yep. It really is. So you were asking what I ended up doing. So there was an activity in Utah it was basically a training activity. I went overseas and I did some work early on, 03 to 04. Well, really 02 to 04. But anyway, gained some expertise, came back and discovered that the military had zero transition program from what they trained guys to do in a cubicle to when they had them go do that job with a backpack on their back supporting the infantry. And the local guys here in Utah, the 300th MI Brigade, had a bunch of guys go out without the necessary training to really excel. Nobody died, but it was a catch up. It was a very steep learning curve for them. And they decided, you know what, we're going to stand up a 2-week course to get these guys the basic knowledge that allows them to function in that field environment. And they came to some buddies of mine and then to me and said, what should this course look like? What should we teach them? And we stood it up, and for the next 8 years, we taught that course to the 300th here in Utah. And then after a couple of years, about 90% of our audience were active duty folks who had heard about the course and said, yes, we need to send our guys through that because they're going to be supporting whoever. So I did that for 8 years. My other deployment happened in the middle of that, a bunch of training deployments, because when you're active duty for special work, that's what it's called, or active duty for operational support for the Guard, it's a lot easier to grab you to go do a month-long mission here, as long as your primary job, the training for me in this case, can survive without you for that period of time. So got to do a lot of stuff.
It makes the paperwork easy if they've already got you on payroll.
Yep.
And stuff.
Well,
Oh my gosh. The story you told about your wife with the whole deers thing. Oh,
yeah. There were
I think
actually two
every
incidents, not just the
hmm?
one. I kind of combined them. When I told that story, I kind of messed it up and combined two incidents that are 10 years apart, but everything happened. They just didn't happen together.
Yeah. But I think every military spouse has had that run in with deers.
Oh
Has
yeah.
every
What do you mean I'm not on insurance? What? Yeah.
Yeah. What do you mean my kid's not covered by TRICARE? They're not listed. Yeah. That was ours. My husband got sent to uh JRTC a month after our son was born, and I thought he was on the deers, and something happened medically, and I needed to get him into the doctor, and all this it was great. It was great. Yeah, that was
That sounds like
happy
a blast.
moments.
Sounds super fun.
It was. Thankfully, divine intervention, my mother was in town, so she was able to stay with my two, because I had three and under. And so
Oh
she was
man.
able to stay with she was able to stay with the kids while I fought with the bureaucrats.
Yeah,
Because
your two
if
other.
not, I would have had all three, including the sick baby, in tow, and
Whew.
yeah, not where anyone wants to be. So
No.
talk about, okay, part of the reason why you came to my attention was this trade-off contest. I heard about your connection with writing the one anthology thing with Brandon Sanderson. You then found
Uh-huh.
out you did the trade-off writing contest. Tell me about, I never knew trade-off did a writing contest. Please tell me all about this. I need to know.
So there's really not a ton to tell, but I will tell you what I know. I didn't know about the contest, had never heard of it. But over the course of a couple of days, three of my friends from around the military all emailed me and said, "Hey, I heard about this contest thing, this writing contest. You should totally give it a shot." Because they all know I write, it's like one of my big hobbies. And so I did. I wrote about a 5,000 word short story, which was within their writing guidelines were a little odd. Most short story contests or submission, forms just set an upper word count limit. These guys said we want it to be 5 pages. And I'm just
Wow.
like, I mean, what do you mean by that? Because do you like 2-point font? I mean, what, double space, single space? What's going on? There was no information. So I just did a normal, you know, format and got it to just, I fiddled with it a little bit to get myself a couple extra words on the 5 pages and finish the story out. But ran it through the writing group that I'm in with Brandon Sanderson. And they had, good suggestions as always. I fiddled around with it, tweaked it, and then sent it in and didn't hear anything, for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is totally normal. This is not the DoD being the DoD. It's normal for any writing competition for that to happen. And then I got an email that said, "Hey, you're in the final 8 out of, a couple of hundred entrants. And we'll let you know if you win your first place, because the first place winner goes to this conference and speaks on something. I don't know what they would have had me speak on, but anyway, the concept of the story that they wanted written was, what will the military be like? What will fighting in the American military be like in 30 years?" And so I just, did science fiction wazoo stuff and tried to tell a pretty good story. And the guy that won, I didn't win, the guy that won first place and went to the conference, very good writer, very good story. And his main focus was how social media was going to affect how the guy on the ground pointing into the spear right in the thick of it, how is that going to affect him? And he's probably dead on. I think he deserved that win because, yeah, good prediction. I went a little far afield, but I had fun writing the story. So
Well, I've mentioned this to you in conversation, but my husband really liked it. He thought it was he reminded him of John Ringo, who is an author he appreciates being military, and because John Ringo's got that military background too. So I
I
think,
absolutely love that. John Ringo is one of my favorite authors. If I ever get to meet that guy, I'm going to squee and fanboy like nobody's business.
well, it's nice to know that, everyone's got the person they, look up to on that sort
Yeah.
of stuff.
I was actually introduced to John Ringo's work by a guy when I was in Kuwait waiting to help invade Iraq. Just one of the dudes in the little slice of the company that we were in had was also a sci-fi fantasy fan. We got to talking, and he's just like, "Well, I got this by John Ringo," and I'm like, "Who?" And he gave me the, "What? You've never read John Ringo?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "Well, here's a book. Read this." And then, forever after literally everything that guy puts out, I read
That's almost a
and
cardinal
try to
sin
buy it hard,
for a military guy who likes sci-fi. That's almost a cardinal sin not to know who John Ringo is.
especially nowadays. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago, so maybe I have an excuse, but yeah, that was
Yeah, the internet wasn't a huge thing, so you get a pass. You get a pass.
okay. Very good.
So we're running short on time, but I want to get to this part because I feel like this is crucial. You did write an anthology story. Um, it was, and I know the backstory. We don't have quite enough time for the backstory, but if anyone's interested, he was on a podcast with Brandon and explained it with Brandon Sanderson. But anyway, you wrote the anthology story. It was supposed to be you and Brandon, but ended up being mostly you. You're working on getting it republished under your name, and you're writing a novel. Talk about your writing experience now that you're working on, because you're coming up with your after military plan. What's
Yeah.
all that looking like?
So I'm going to say they're tied together, but they're not really tied together. I mean, I'm working for Brandon Sanderson now for his company. That's my after military plan. But I'm also actively working on my short story chops and working on a novel that I have placed with Brandon's agent, Johsua Bilmes of Jabberwocky Literary Agency. Great guy, amazing. I actually met him and introduced him to Brandon first. And then,
Well,
Brandon
thank
hit
you.
it big. And Joshua has always just been very friendly and encouraging. And he heard that I had written a novel and put it through Writing Group. And he's just like, Ethan, why have I not seen this? You need to send this to me. So I sent it to him. He's like, this is good. I have suggestions. And they were pretty big suggestions and really good suggestions. So I'm like, oh, man, that is a lot of work, but it is totally worth it to fiddle with a novel in that way. And he's done that twice. And he's still actively pestering me about getting that novel. And I'm working on the third round of major revisions to it, all of which are really great ideas. And as soon as I'm done, I'll hand it off to Joshua, and maybe he'll say, okay, cool, it's time to sell it to publishers. Or maybe he'll say, I have another idea. We'll find out. But funny story about the short story that I wrote with Brandon, and won't go into that story. We don't have time. But on the podcast, we talked about it in the history of it, and he said, Skar, that's what he calls me, Skar, you should totally put that up on Amazon. So I started doing that. I had never been 100% sure that I could. It may not happen. I put it up, submitted it, and the Kindle people said, look, we know you're not Brandon Sanderson. Stop trying to claim that you wrote something with Brandon Sanderson. That was, in very bureaucrat-ease, that's what they said. And so I'm like, okay, well, I got proof. So I pulled up the contract that Brandon and I had signed for the anthology with his name on it and my name on it and all the details, and sent it to him and said, well, actually, how about this? Is this proof? And I haven't heard back from him on that yet. The story is called H.A.R.R.E, Heuristic Algorithm and Reasoning Response Engine, which very obtuse, but the actual title is an acronym, H.A.R.R.E. So hopefully by the time this airs, I don't know when this is going to air, it'll all be fixed and it'll be available for sale on Amazon. Woohoo!
I hope so. The goal is to have this be part of the profiles of veterans and put it out during this month of November. So you'll probably be more near to the middle end of the month, so a couple of weeks. So maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see. But I'll keep everyone informed. And when we do get word, I will make sure I put it up for listeners so they can get it all checked out. But I will have the links to your Tradoc writing and your where they can get the actual anthology book if they want to. So.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. That's fantastic.
No worries. No worries. I'm really grateful to have been able to have this conversation and get to do this with you. So thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing all that. I hope everything works out with it. And we'll just have to see where it goes.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, so I have gotten some wonderful news from Skar, Ethan. The short story that we spoke about that he wrote with Brandon Sanderson, as well as his short story from his Tradoc times, the Tradoc writing contest, and another short story are now available on Kindle. So if you are interested in checking out his writing, go ahead and take a look on those. I'll be putting the links in the description below. I am super excited for him, and just as a clarification, he is guard, and sometimes that by the civilian community is considered a veteran because he's not active duty. That's why he's been slotted in with the installments of profiles on veterans. And I'm really grateful he was able to do the interview. I'm super excited about the development with his short stories. And when his novel comes out, we'll be there for it too. So, as always, I'm your host, Sam Wolf, and you're listening to Life of a Military Wife.